On today's show, Stephen Colbert pokes fun at the Goldman Sachs executive who wrote an incendiary op-ed in the New York Times. We'll show you that video. And is Wall Street feeding on poor college kids? We'll talk with one Occupy organizer who says that as tuitions rise, the wallets of Wall Street lenders get fatter. And members of Women Occupy don their favorite Shiro costumes to take on the corporate beast, Bank of America. I'm Jared Jacang Mayer. Each week, we bring you stories from the front lines of the Occupy Wall Street movement and give the microphone to you, the 99%. You're watching Occupy the Media. Thanks for tuning in to Occupy the Media. If this is your first time watching, thanks for joining us. This show is an effort by Free Speech TV to stay on top of the latest news coming out of the Occupy Wall Street movement. We want to cover the real issues that you won't hear about from the corporate media, and we want to do this by giving the mic to you, the 99%. So join the conversation by giving us a call toll-free at 877-575-FSTV. The lines are open. Now let's get started with the latest headlines from the Occupy movement. In California, it turns out that the Marine Corps veteran who suffered a fractured skull during a crackdown by police was not hit by a tear gas canister as originally thought. It was actually a police metal beanbag round. Oakland police admit that Scott Olson was struck by a beanbag of steel pellets fired from less than 30 feet away. The incident happened during an Occupy Oakland protest in October. Olson's attorney says this new information shows that the officer intentionally aimed at Olson's head. Occupy Long Beach is trying to help a single mother stay in her home. The woman, Rachel New, and Wells Fargo began negotiating a modification to her mortgage last year, but now she and her family are being forced out. When Occupy Long Beach supporters and Rachel marched on the bank in an attempt to repurchase the home from Wells Fargo, the bank shut its doors. In Austin, Tom Morello, former Rage Against the Machine guitarist, took his Occupy politics to the streets at the popular South by Southwest festival. He led a crowd of thousands in chanting the American folk song "This Land Is Your Land," even after police shut down the Assembly's PA system. Morello employed the people's microphone, using the collective voices of supporters to amplify the message. In Boston, Bank of America's ATMs were made more truthful. Activists with the Rainforest Action Network say corporate banks aren't telling the truth. That's why demonstrators transformed 70 ATMs into automated truth machines. Instead of the typical ATM options, customers could choose from transactions like investing in coal plants or foreclosing on homeowners. Protesters filled Manhattan's Zuccotti Park once again on the 6-month anniversary of Occupy. Here are the details.
Occupy Wall Street celebrated its 6-month anniversary by momentarily returning to the birthplace of the movement. On Saturday, thousands of protesters called for the snakes to be driven out of Wall Street. Occupiers reclaimed Zuccotti Park for a brief time until hundreds of police officers arrived just before midnight to clear the demonstrators. In all, 73 protesters were arrested. However, the reoccupation made its point, quelling the rumors that this movement lost momentum. As spring stirs the sleepy masses, Occupy Wall Street continues to blossom and grow. Filmmaker and activist Michael Moore was speaking nearby and encouraged those in attendance to join the demonstration.
I think this is our invitation to head over to Zuccotti Park. It's a 10-minute walk. 5 minutes if you're young.
This is Caroline Briggs for Occupy the Media.
That wraps up the latest headlines from the Occupy front, but let's take a minute to dig into the latest action from the Occupy movement. Sitting here in our studio today is Marcy Miranda, Free Speech TV's news producer, and Don Rojas, FSTV executive director. Marcy, this big protest in Manhattan on the 6-month anniversary of the Occupy Wall Street movement, it happened on Saturday, but there's been some action since then. What's going on?
there's been more reoccupations, or at least attempts to. People at the Occupy Wall Street movement have gone on to different parks throughout New York City and said, you know, we're going to try to reoccupy with their sleeping bags, with their tents. Police have, you know, come and evicted them from each of those, but they are strong in wanting to do that. And, you know, there's still organizations still planning for more things to come for this American Spring that we are hearing about and anticipating.
So, Don, occupiers coming back and saying, we're here, we're not going anywhere, but Mayor Michael Bloomberg there in New York says you're not getting in.
Right, and Mayor Michael Bloomberg is an icon of the 1%. He is a multi-billionaire, one of the richest politicians in elected office in the country. And he comes out of Wall Street. He is very sympathetic to the Wall Street culture. He's sympathetic to the agenda of the 1%. And under his command, under his orders, the New York City police literally attacked the demonstrators on Saturday in Zuccotti Park. Close to 100 were arrested. The police action was excessive. It was repressive as well. It was totally over the top and uncalled for. And but it reflects what we're going to see more of this in other cities around the country. The militarization of the local police forces, and they are going to go after the Occupy protesters.
And Don, you know, Bloomberg had cleared out Zuccotti Park, famously, what was it, a couple months ago?
Right. It was in
the late fall.
Late fall,
and
yes.
so they've managed to prevent any encampment from setting up, but clearly they don't anticipate, nor do they want a reoccupation of this same park or other parks. So it does seem that lines are hardening here.
Lines are hardening, and you know, people on both sides are digging in their heels. I think that the Occupy movement is going to continue to stand its ground, continue to proclaim its principles and its values. You're going to see more and larger protests in the streets. You're going to see Occupy activities of all types across the country in the spring, in the weeks ahead.
And we're going to be talking a lot more about the American Spring and what we can expect later on in the show. But let's give our viewers a chance to weigh in. Give us a call at 877-575-FSTV. This is what we like to call our telephone mic check.
Mic check. Mic check.
Okay, our first caller on the line, Bob from Wisconsin. You're on Occupy the Media. Hi, Bob. Can you hear me? You're on Occupy the Media.
How are you, Media?
I'm sorry?
Okay, let me take the speaker. How you guys doing?
We're doing great. Do you have a comment or question for us on Occupy the Media?
Yeah, you had Michael Moore on. He's one of the 1%ers. Shouldn't you be like, you know, giving him, putting him on the hot seat? I mean, when he does a film, he has his films edited in Canada, so he doesn't have to pay the union rates.
And so, Bob, your point is that Michael Moore, who's been you know, very successful with his films and his books, is, I don't know what tax bracket he's in, but it's certainly not the same as some of these protesters out here. So let me throw this at Don. Thanks for your call, Bob.
I think you know, Michael Moore is probably personally a fairly wealthy guy. His documentary films have done very well, have broken all kinds of records, and so maybe Michael does qualify in terms of his financial worth to be in the 1%. But I don't think that's where his heart is, and definitely not where his mind is. His agenda is squarely with the 99%, and we saw that demonstrated over the weekend at Pace University at the Left Forum.
Well, and that's an interesting point, because even though people can you know, legitimately maybe point out some of these contradictions where Michael Moore does have a certain amount of wealth, but then he still holds cachet among these protesters because he was at Pace University and he called people out there to Zuccotti Park, and they followed along. So at least within the movement, people haven't abandoned Michael Moore.
No, I don't think Michael Moore remains a very strong voice in the Occupy movement, as other voices are emerging, you know, in the academic community, among youth, in people of color communities.
Yeah, but I think it's fair to say, if I can just chime in real quick, that there are people in the Occupy movement that totally agree with Bob, and that, you know, do kind of call out Michael Moore and say, well, you're kind of speaking for us, and you shouldn't, because you are part of the 1%ers. So I think, like everything in the Occupy movement, there's two sides to every coin, and, you know, people who are for and against. So it's a good point, though.
Yeah, I think the debate is healthy.
Okay, we do have another caller on the line, but we might have to save it for a future segment. Do you think big banks want to help students eliminate their loan debt? Hardly. In fact, Wall Street is making a considerable profit thanks to college kids. So Marcy, tell us about Occupy. Is it Occupy the Campus? Occupy Colleges.
Occupy Colleges, yeah. It's a group that's going out really to fight back against these increased tuitions and state budgets that have slashed higher education. So you're forcing more, middle-class students to pay more for a college education, and the struggles that come with that. Now we've got this insane amount of debt that students are coming out with, and so Occupy Colleges is really going.
And so we actually do have an interview with Natalia Abrams of Occupy Colleges. So let's watch that.
Natalia, thank you so much for joining us today. Start us off by talking a little bit about college students and what they're facing at the moment.
What we're facing right now is a historic mountain of debt for students. Tuitions have risen over 300% or 70% if you want to adjust it for inflation to be fair, but still an egregious amount over the past 30 years, and it's gotten predominantly worse since the financial crash in 2008, where Wall Street essentially just ran with it, took all of our money and forced state budgets to slash education tenfold. And we're really feeling the pinch now 4 years out of our financial crash, excuse me.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier, this idea of Wall Street running with the money and forcing state budgets to make some cuts. Talk a little bit about those cuts and how that's affected higher education in particular.
Well, it's been tremendous slashes to education. A great example right now is here in California. An article just came out today that the Cal State University system, which, mind you, in the 70s was completely free under Lyndon Johnson, is now freezing enrollment because they can no longer afford to enroll students. So they have now completely frozen spring enrollment, and fall is pending based on budgets, the budgets that will be coming out in the fall. So students now have to hold their breath to see if they're going to college, to see if their state budget will allow it. That's how bad it's getting for students.
So we're saying students in California aren't guaranteed admission anywhere anymore, and it doesn't matter whether or not they can pay. It's just that there's no space for them?
There's no money for them. They are allowing the international students and out-of-state students that can afford to pay, that are paying much higher rates than California students, but there's a freeze right now pending the budget for California students. And we're seeing this all over, 10% tuition hikes year after year, where it's literally pricing the middle-class student out of going to college.
So talk now a little bit about the good news. What is Occupy College trying to do to change the tide?
Well, we started it on October 2nd, so just a mere 2 weeks after Occupy Wall Street started, because we saw the real need for students to get out there and voice their opinions. What's going on with the student loan fiasco is essentially the economic injustices that are affecting students, and we've really seen a huge resurgence of students coming out. We haven't seen this really since the 60s, and coming out in droves to protest what's going on. And we've seen small changes, but it's still something. We saw at Mount Holyoke College, they actually froze tuition. So for the first time since 1972, they agreed not to raise tuition. And we believe that that's by some of the pressure that the Occupy movement, more specifically the Occupy Colleges movement, has been putting on these institutions.
That was Natalia Abrams, a member of Occupy Colleges, and this group, Marcy, is really trying to give voice to all of these students. They're in California, but in other states as well, who are truly feeling the tremendous pinch because of less state funding for public universities and institutions. But her point seems to be like this extends beyond just the states, and there's a connection there to Wall Street as well, or at least a financial crisis.
Yeah, she, when we were talking during the interview, she was also saying that Wall Street basically, or Sallie Mae in particular, used to be government-backed, now is a private entity, and you've got Wall Street that's sort of trying to change the conversation as well. So there's, different ways in which they're showing that, they would benefit from students, being in debt.
And these massive tuition hikes there in California. And otherwise, Don, 10 seconds?
Wall Street wants a higher student indebtedness. It's in their interest to have public debt shifted like that. I mean, it's a crisis for the student, for college students and for the 99%. but it's a boon for Wall Street. This,
and also,
debt crisis.
you know, we should ask our viewers out there, people who are students or have children who are entering college, what are their prospects? Unless you have enough money to go to a private university, are you able to go to a state college? We're going to take a quick break, but we hope you'll stay with us, because when we come back, we'll talk about how the 1% in Texas tried to keep minorities away from the voting booths. But first, we want to hear from our social media viewers. Why do you think conservative legislators are passing voter suppression laws specifically targeting minorities? To join the conversation, post your comments online at Facebook and Twitter. We'll be right back.
My name's Chuck Helms. I'm from Nutley, New Jersey. I'm an older guy. I have a pension. I have Social Security. I have an IRA. But if we don't bring the corporations, the banks, Wall Street, and the rich back to reality, there's going to be nothing left for you guys. And it's a shame for my children, for my grandchildren. It's a very important thing.
Hello, I'm Antoinette June, and this is your Occupy Update. April 16th is the national occupation of Washington, D.C., Occupy Power. On April 16th, occupiers will greet Congress's return to D.C. with direct actions as they occupy power and show just how strong Occupy Power is. For more information, please visit nowdc.org.
You're watching Free Speech TV, a network powered by the people.
In Greece, there are 800,000 people that work for the government now. It's a little country, and that's a big part of their job scene. You're going to cut 150,000 people from a payroll of 800,000 in a country whose current unemployment rate is 19.9%. This is lunacy. This is a way of crushing a society and making a kind of demonstration case for all Europeans and for Americans. This is an economic crisis, and we're going to solve the crisis on the backs of the poorest, most distressed part of the population. That's how we work in a capitalist system. That's who we victimize. And I think Americans ought to be very, very concerned. Certainly the rest of Europe is. Because this is a model that says we too in the United States are going to be thinking about cutting minimum wage, cutting back Social Security, cutting back, as almost every state and city are doing in our country, on public education, on public safety, and so on. So the Greeks are the advanced case being tested, how far you can push a population, so that other countries that are moving in that direction will have a clear idea of what best to do, what not to do. It's a little bit like an experiment, and it should give all of us real pause.